I need a haircut.
Okay, I'm not live on Instagram. Well, it says I'm live. Let me check here. Okay. It's not working. Let's see here. Stream key. Give me 2 minutes. Let me see if I could do it because I know I'm live on YouTube, but I would want it to be live on Instagram. I saw myself. I know, but it's on my device. I think I'm live now. Let's see. I don't see you on Instagram. Oh, wait, hold up. Yeah, you're live. I see it. Thank you. All right, so we are live on Instagram, live on YouTube. If you guys are following us anywhere, you could join us YouTube live, Instagram live, and StreamYard as well. I see some people on StreamYard. Oralia and JC, let me know if you guys can hear me. Because I think I may have to add you guys to the stage. But let me know in the chat if you're able to hear me. If not, send me a text. All right. Thank you guys so much for your time and patience. I'm here with my good friend RJ, and today's live call is to go over boomers and ADUs. This is a big topic that RJ and I wanted to talk about because we are experiencing it, right? Where we're all somehow involved with family members who are either aging or millennials who are kind of struggling to tap into today's market. And we feel like this conversation would be super helpful for a lot of my followers, a lot of his followers, who can sort of bridge that gap and really help one another, one generation to another. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. And we got a lot of cool visuals for you guys because I feel like, at least for me, that's how I learn, just by watching and looking at real life case studies. And I will be keeping track of the chat. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out, type them in the chat on Instagram or YouTube. And I'll hand it off to RJ so he could tell you a little bit about him.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you. And happy Sunday, everybody. So I already see a question here about what does ADU mean? And I can tell you firsthand, we used to call them granny flats. We used to call them a guest house. We used to call them, um, I mean, it basically an accessory dwelling unit is that extra unit which has evolved through California law in giving the description, a very specific description on allowing us to have additional housing on an existing property. So I can tell you that ADU is also used as the term tiny home, and that's an East Coast word that's kind of traveled west, just like ADU in its terminology is traveling east. So I constantly, want to remind people that they are used synonymously, but they are different in terms of terminology. If you're going to go exact into the tiny home sphere, and we can talk about that later. But for right now, Stephanie, it's obviously being a boomer myself, having 4 kids, and them being millennials. I'm in the lending industry, and I hear and see a lot of these scenarios, and it couldn't have been a better time to talk about boomers and millennials and housing.
Exactly, and I think you're a perfect example of that, and we really want to highlight your story, but we're gonna kind of save that throughout the conversation that we're having today because okay, Oralia said she can hear us in the backstage. JC's here. Got it. Okay, I wanted to make sure the people who are on StreamYard can hear us, just so that I don't have to add your guys' face up to the stage. We don't want to put you guys out there. But yeah, so let's get straight into it. I think the biggest thing is highlighting why this is important. And RJ, I'll hand it back to you because when we had the podcast, this was something that we talked about. And so we do have a podcast. RJ was on my All Things ADU podcast, and this was like a highlight of conversation and topic of discussion that we had around why is this so important, right? This pertains to millennials. I think even Gen Zs, right, will at some point have to deal with this. So the importance of why this conversation matters is because one, boomers are the largest aging generation and also the generation that has the most amount of equity, which we'll tap into. And many times they just don't know how to leverage that equity, how to initiate, the ADU process. And obviously having a consultant is very important because as a millennial, you don't want to be the one to kind of take lead. Definitely hire a professional, but just highlighting the importance of it, right? And, I don't know if you want to add a little bit more to that, but flexibility with ADUs is also a big one, but
Yeah.
the importance of it.
Yeah, that's a great segue because in 2019, I was contemplating tearing down and rebuilding this structure that was in my backyard. And I somehow convinced my wife this was a good option to do at the time. And I kind of explained the picture that both of us have aging parents in their 80s. And we wanted an option in case of one of the parents would pass and we would move the other parent closer to us. It would just make more sense because the cost of elderly care is just skyrocketing. And I was convincing her that this was a strategy to build an option, meaning this structure was going to be an option for an aging parent to come live with us. But we also have 4 adult children, and many people our age, us boomers, have aging children that sometimes move back, whether it's a career change or no career, or we're moving them from the bedroom to the backyard. We didn't have that at the time, but I was trying to explain there could be an option of needing that kind of housing to maintain our independence from one of our adult children. And the third reason why I was convinced that having an ADU in the backyard was, of course, giving the opportunity to move in it and rent the main house, which was a 5-bedroom house that we weren't occupying all 5 bedrooms. There was just 2 of us. So once the convincing happened, I penciled it out. And during 2019, the construction started. And we all know what happened in 2020. Well, in February, the whole world shut down. We went into COVID mode. And I was very fortunate that construction continued in my unit and it got built in the end of 2020. So that being said, we didn't have a problem with the kids. Our parents were still very healthy. So we moved into the ADU and we rented out the front house. And it has been rented since 2021, and we have some great tenants. We had some family ties to some friends, and they were military. So they were transferring out to San Diego, which is where I live. And we moved into the ADU. So I kind of joke around when I talk to my clients about financing and about the situation using an ADU is that I live in my backyard and I'm happy to, I'm living in my backyard. I have no mortgage payment because the payment's being paid by the renters in the front house. And it's been a very good move for both of us. And it's kind of like, I like to say it's like living in a very nice hotel room where we can leave, lock up, and travel. And, we have the RV and we go visit our kids. And this has been a perfect housing option for both of us in terms of having the freedom to enjoy, moving into our senior years and moving into retirement and having this kind of housing option. So it's going to be very interesting in the next couple of years because with the SB9 and the other rules allowing us to sell the unit, I think our final option is going to keep both units intact, but there is that option, which you can probably explain better,
Right.
that allows us to do that.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to that new bill, which is AB 1033, which basically means you're able to sell off your ADU now. So that really even helps you like really control your assets and really share that wealth with your family, right? If at some point you wanted to sell off your ADU to one of your 4 kids, right? Or maybe sell the main home and the ADU separately now to each kid. Like you have the flexibility and the option to do that, especially in San Diego, because it is an opt-in basis. And San Diego was one of the cities who just opted into allowing you to sell off your ADU. But I wanted to backpedal a little bit to why this is so important and how we're all experiencing this, right? I was having a conversation with my mom probably like a week ago, and she brought it up to me and she said, I think we should do like a junior ADU and an ADU. And that way, right now they're living off of one of their rentals, right? And so just thinking ahead, my dad and her need to at some point create some sort of passive income in order for them to be well off, and unfortunately in California, retirement isn't something that's really going to go a long way, right? So you have to think of creative options and different ways to create cash flow for now or for later. You talked about how initially the thought was for your parents and now you end up living in it, and then maybe later down the line it could be a rental and you decided to rent out the main home, right? Which you hadn't even thought about that. And I think that's the beauty to it, is once you initiate the process and you want to start exploring different options around ADUs, there are plenty of options, and ADUs give you so much flexibility that it could be a rental right now, or it can be your primary home later in life, right? Or it could be for your parents or aging parents. And I know that as millennials, we're all somehow dealing with that. Another thing too is for millennials themselves, if you have parents who have, I think you and I, RJ, were talking about it a little bit offline, was there's a lot of boomers who have equity and they would like to leverage that equity to be able to build an ADU, but income becomes an issue, right? So now millennials are able to help kind of bridge that gap so that they can qualify to build an ADU. And in return, the millennials now are able to tap into the market, right? Kind of, because they're able to build something when, many of us really can't even afford to tap in to buy a property when the entry price point in Orange County is 1.3.
You brought up a great point. I literally had a scenario where it's an Anaheim couple. The husband is mid to late 60s. The wife is early 60s. He's on a consulting job, so he's contract work, but the wife is still working in mainstream income. They live in Anaheim. They've got a great lot. They have a great house. But the scenario is the homeowner reached out to me and said, "Hey, RJ, I'm not going to look good on paper for qualifying. And here's my scenario. I'm doing consulting work. My wife is doing, she's got a good job, but the combined incomes are not going to look good because I am the one," this is the homeowner saying, "I am the one that co-signed and I signed on for my daughter's student loan debt. So when we ran through the scenario and I added up the income, like he had told me, good credit scores, good equity, but we just didn't have enough income. And I said, well, what is your overall strategy? And he says, well, ideally is, my daughter who they just had I have my first grandchild and her husband. I want them to live in the front house and I need to build this ADU in the back house so that my wife and I could be in the smaller ADU because we don't need the big house, but we need somewhere to live. And buying something in Anaheim is just not an option. And that's where the ADU flexibility comes in. And so when I ran the scenario with him, I said, well, tell you what, why don't we do a bundle? And he's on the phone. He's like, what do you mean by a bundle? And I said, let's get everybody involved. Add the daughter who had a great paying job, add the son-in-law who had a great paying job. Let's all get on the loan together to allow us to do the proper financing, to do a renovation loan to finance the construction of the ADU. And he never thought that would be a possibility. And we did it. So we're actually in application right now with the family members who are planning to live in the front house. They've now built in this multi-generational housing, and they're going to have the opportunity to help the parents who want to retire in the backyard. And the family has a new start, and they're going to be living in the front house.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I mean, a lot of people don't know that you could have up to 5 people on a loan. So, food for thought there. Sometimes it's multiple family members, right, who are trying to leverage and figure out a co-living situation. So don't be afraid to ask. It could be 2 to 3 people, up to 5, right? And you guys can all kind of help each other out. And that's what I mean about like your creativity, which we'll talk about when it comes to financing. Working with a lender who not only understands financing, but also understands the strategy behind it, the motivation as to why you're looking to build it. And, just exactly what you just pointed out, right? Something that they had no clue. They weren't aware of this knowledge. You brought it to the table because of the experience that you have and because you're very ADU focused. And I think that's very important too throughout the process because, although RJ has had an amazing experience, he's also very knowledgeable in the process. And I think you don't have to get too caught up into knowing every single detail, but you definitely have to vet the people that you do choose to work with. So having an understanding about the process is important. And that's kind of what we're going to walk you guys through today. Here's a quick case study of one that we did in Lake Forest. If you guys don't know where that's at, it's kind of near Laguna Niguel, Laguna Beach, but a bit more inland, but great area. And this ADU was a new construction, that was built for a family member. It was for one of the partners' moms, I believe. Her mom was going to move from England and decided to, build a brand new ADU for their mom. And now she gets to live there and gets to travel, right? Because the flexibility with ADUs, as you said earlier, now it feels like a hotel for you. You're able to get up and go as you please, and she was basically going to do the same. Live
and created that person's the
Yeah.
person has their independence.
Exactly, and the person has their independence. The mom is aging, but she's not to the point where she can't care for herself. But I think it's so important also to have that privacy and that independent space, but yet still be in coexistence with someone and not be completely alone, especially for boomers. Like I think of all the boomers who are living in assisted living facilities. You obviously don't get the same care. You don't get the same lifestyle. You're not in the same environment that you've created for yourself. And believe it or not, that goes a long way with longevity, right? And unfortunately, it causes other things like stress and depression and mental health issues. So this goes beyond just building, right? And functionality. I think it's mentally healthy for us to be able to coexist with our aging family members and vice versa. Same for them.
You brought up a great point, and I don't know the exact terminology, but I do want to throw it out there for the California residents that I don't know if it's Medi-Cal or Medicaid. I think it's Medi-Cal that does have a program for an aging parent to hire a family member to take care and receive state benefits for the caregiver status of that family member. And again, I apologize, I don't have the exact terminology.
Yeah, it could be either one, because I know Medicaid is usually.
I know that it's a California only program, so I'm gonna vary to say it's probably Medi-Cal, but that is something that people need to tap into because we all know how expensive elderly care is, and if
it's Medicaid. So it says Medicaid can pay family caregivers for in-home care through eligibility and program.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Janelle.
Yeah. No, but that's great to know, right? We also have, Janelle said, in-home support services, or IHSS, and then Medi-Cal. So I think it could be several of the ones that she mentioned. Thank you, Janelle.
And right, but what a great way to support. You have an aging parent that lives in the backyard, and there's an opportunity to receive income to support that person.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's just the opportunities and the options are endless, and they're out there. I think once you just decide, right, don't worry about the how, that'll come together. You just have to decide if this is the right decision for you. And that's all we're trying to showcase today is what's working for RJ, what I see working with clients, what the reality is, right? Then it's funny because that's what it says here. The reality is the rising cost of assisted living and senior housing, which is out the roof. How much did you tell me was assisted living?
Oh my gosh. It varies, of course, but I'm going to say in California, it's anywhere from $4,500 to $5,500 a month for private care. And that can get costly.
And we don't think about these things, right? At least like millennials and Gen Zs, we don't think about it, but we're going to have to deal with it because these conversations you're going to be faced with eventually, right? At some point, you're going to have the discussion with your siblings about what are we going to do with mom and dad, right? Where are they going to live? Who's going to take care of them? And I see it, in selling real estate day in, day out, where siblings are just not seeing eye to eye. And a lot of it has to do with money being an issue, right? They can't seem to agree on who's going to pay for what and where are they sending the parents to and who's going to take care of them. And so I think this option just creates a lot of flexibility for everyone involved, and it kind of makes it at least a little bit smoother, less resistance from everyone who really needs to help out parents and any aging family member, because the pricing just speaks, right? You either pay $8,000, $6,000 to $8,000 a month in assisted living, or you can have maybe a $1,500 HELOC payment or some sort of lower financing cost to build your ADU. And every case is different, but you're definitely not going to be paying $8,000 a month. That's for sure.
Right. And I want to also touch on, I had a client in Simi Valley that an older homeowner, and his strategy was to put a tiny home on wheels in the backyard because his wife, who was suffering from dementia, he wanted to keep her at home but continue his consulting business inside the house in his office. And the tiny home in the backyard that he purchased was for the caregiver Monday through Friday to come stay in the backyard and care for his wife while he continued his consulting job. So, this is a real situation of real people. And like you said, every client has a story. And I think the ideal, whether it's the ADU realtor like yourself, Stephanie, or me, the lender that's an ADU lender, we're always searching for one more question, because it's kind of like detective work. If you're not asking enough questions, you're not getting enough clues to understanding the client's true needs. And without having that kind of relationship and that kind of experience, you could be leaving a lot of ideas off the table and not helping the consumer enough explore their opportunities by using an ADU for many reasons, like the scenario I just said.
Exactly. And I think JC had a question. He said, to expand on this topic, are ADUs built right into the ground structure of the property versus mobile? Would they share plumbing, electrical, gas? Great question. there's different types of builds, right? RJ just gave an example of a tiny home on wheels. That doesn't mean that the tiny home is certified and ready to be converted into an ADU. There's some companies that we work with, like Clever Tiny Homes, they've kind of set models that are preset and ready to go. If you wanted to convert it into an ADU, then you have it installed properly, but it's already built up to code and everything would kind of operate independently. You
Yes.
also have traditional builds, right, which are the ground up construction that you're talking about. Those typically are a little bit, priced right, I'd say, and they take a little bit longer. But that's an option. And then a lot of what we see in SoCal is conversions. So that could be garage conversion, it can be a bedroom conversion, it can be both plus an extension to that. So converting the garage with an extension, converting the fourth bedroom with the bathroom and adding another 200 square feet. Part of that process, you'll know once you get started with the process. And I have a picture of a feasibility as well that I'll show you guys. But to answer your question, yes, the
That,
feasibility go over all of
that
that.
that's a great topic. Yeah, because you got to know, and even if you don't know, it's good to get educated on what options there are because there are a lot of good reputable construction companies building great ADUs. There are many ADU manufactured units, which are important to know the difference between keeping them on wheels or having them affixed to the ground on a permanent foundation. But there are companies like Clever Tiny Homes that actually create, build, manufacture a modular unit that literally when it's in the build stage, it can either be left on wheels or it can be affixed to the ground. So it's important to know the options and what your needs are because you need to know the difference between keeping it on wheels or affixing it to the ground because it has opposite consequences to real estate as well as fixtures. I
Yeah,
do know that.
right now there's a whole bunch of different types of builds that are coming, like container types of ADUs. You also have SIP panels, which are the structural insulated panels. You've got steel framing. You've got a combination of everything, right, that I just mentioned. So there's different types of builds, and everyone's going to kind of have a different style because you want it to look aesthetically pleasing to that specific neighborhood. So like a container home may not work, in the center of Orange County, but maybe out in the valley in a different type of project it would. Same with some of these clever tiny home builds. Traditional is always a good option to begin with because you're going to get the value for it. I think all the other models are great, some of them, but the value just isn't there, and that's a whole other topic, right? When we talk about appraising and evaluating a property. Another question he asked really quick was, what are considerations around amenities and square footage, basement versus two above ground floors? So what I'm getting is, yeah, during the feasibility inspection, we would go over how much you're able to build based on your Florida area ratio. So again, every property is sort of different. Like if I was to go do a site inspection on this one, right, we would be able to then tell you like what are the setbacks, what are the height requirements, how much can we build, and then we can give you different proposals. So it's not just going to the site inspection with one option in mind. We're going with 2 to 3 different options in mind, and that's something we also help you with. We could say, okay, if you want to do a traditional garage conversion, 150,000 roughly. If you want one of these clever tiny homes and have it installed, probably somewhere around the same, right? And that's one thing that I also want to highlight. People think that certain bills are a little bit less expensive, and yes, maybe, but for the most part, what I'm seeing all across the board is kind of like the same pricing, to be quite honest. So at the end of the day, but yeah, this is one that we also helped in Long Beach, and it was also for an aging family member, but it was going to be also like a flex space. So a lot of midterms are also going to be part of this conversation because midterms allow you to rent out your ADU for more than 30 days, but less than a year. So a lot of aging family members also want to travel, right? Like RJ was talking about closing up his ADU and traveling. And I'm sure maybe you don't need to do a midterm right now because you're renting out the main home. But if you wanted to, right, if you're going to be on the road more than 6 months at a time, it wouldn't be a bad idea to, you already have it furnished, maybe
Right.
prepare it for those couple months out of the year that you won't be there. And
Yeah,
that's flexible.
I see a question from Jace. Quickly answer. So he asks, are ADUs built right into the ground structure of the property versus mobile? Would they share plumbing, electrical, and gas? So the quick answer to that is on any type of build, whether it's an ADU construction or a pre-built ADU to be installed, the pre-builts are going to still require the same trenching to put a sewer line, electrical line, and water line. And they can be shared with the main unit. So that's something that I wanted to address because many people don't know that they don't require gas. They just use electrical. They need a sewer line and water. So I hope I
Yeah,
answered.
exactly. So here, for example, here's the feasibility of one that we were proposing, 735 square feet. That could easily be a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, pretty decent size. Now, this ADU, once built, has to be connected to the main sewer line, which sometimes could be on this main street here, or if you have alley access, it may be in the alley, but it has to be connected to the main sewer line. So that's what he was talking about, the trenching, right? That needs to be done, which drives up costs, by the way. Because if your main sewer line is all the way out here, and this is about 50 feet of trenching, when people say, well, the garage is already there, like, why is it more money? Well, it's the trenching, it's a couple other factors that come into play. And that's why the feasibility inspection is so important. That's probably the best way to get started because that would answer all of your questions. We look at utility connections as well. So the sewer connection has to be to the main sewer, but everything else, as RJ said, could be shared. But I will say, you want to treat it as independent as possible. So if budgeting isn't an option to have utilities independent, at least have like a sub meter, for the gas and the power, because it just makes it a lot easier. Because if in the future you want to rent it out, it's a lot more transparent with utility usage. Or even better, if in the future you want to sell it, right? Now you don't have to worry about that. So I always tell people to be mindful, even if it's for a family member, try to have at least the utilities that all utilities separate, to be quite honest. But
Yeah,
they don't
I
all
think I've learned that mistake, Stephanie. I did not do a separate meter for my water. And if I decide to sell my ADU separately from my main unit, I got a quote just this past month between the permits and the actual trenching of a new water line to the back unit. It's $50,000. So
exactly.
I did not listen to my feasibility study. So that is a great warning for you because it was in my feasibility study to get that all separate. I got the electric, I got the gas, I didn't get the water.
Yeah, and I see it all the time, right? Because I do a lot of property management, so managing ADUs. And what happens is initially it was for a family member. Now the family member is in assisted living for whatever issue, or maybe they moved somewhere else, and now it's a rental, and now they're having a hard time figuring out how much does the tenant pay in utilities, how much do they pay. And I mean, if you've already done it like RJ, easy math would be to just average out the last 12 months of utility usage and try to average out what the tenant would have to pay and factor it into the rent, or have it as part of the utility cost. But yeah, definitely something to consider, and it's something so small, right? But these are kind of the conversations that we have with you when we're doing the feasibility, which will then, this inspection will allow me to give you a proposal, 1, 2, or 3, depending on what you want to do. So yeah. And you could have up to 2. I don't know if I mentioned that at the beginning, but in California, if it's feasible, right, when we go inspect it, you could have a junior ADU and a ADU. And at that point, maybe have a flex space for the junior ADU and, the ADU for yourself or for your parents.
Is there a square footage difference between the two?
There is, yeah. So junior ADU, 500 square feet or smaller. And then for a regular is up to 1,200 square feet. In some cases, 1,500, 1,600 square feet.
Got it.
Here is another video of one that was also for an aging family member. I forgot the square footage on this one, but I'll send you guys the presentation. Anyone who joined us today and maybe showed up late, didn't get to see the whole thing, we can send this to you guys. Just send me a DM or or email me. I'll put my email down here. But now the good part, right? Let's talk about numbers because it's something that a lot of people don't know how to get started. And it's the same way that you would get started if you were to purchase a home, figuring out financing. How much do you qualify for? What is that number that you're qualified for? Because that's going to dictate how much you can build. You may have the idea of building a 2-bedroom, 700 square foot ADU or 1,200 3-bed, 2-bath. But if the financing doesn't back that up, then you're back to square one. Now we got to figure out, okay, well, how much, and it's better to just start there, right? Like, how much can you qualify for with you and your kids and whatever scenario? Like, that's where RJ kind of works his magic and figures out, okay, what loan product works for you based on your current financing goals, right? So what is that you see right now, RJ?
Well, the good news, Stephanie, is rates are dropping, which is a good thing for everyone to hear. And I feel like they're going to continue to get lower towards the end of the year onto the next year. So I always offer a free consultation and a free pre-qualification. Now, the qualification is offered to give the client the confidence of knowing that we can run several scenarios, several hypotheticals on what would work best for them. Then we move on to a conversation called the pre-approval. Now, a pre-approval means we take a full documentation loan and we get all information such as tax returns, pay stubs, bank statements, and we run what's called a soft pull credit report. And we run through the scenario desk many different options to give the client the most information to see which options work best for them. So the most common thing for a homeowner to look at is their equity, which again, using a HELOC is a great loan, but you also need to know that that's a variable rate. HELOCs are typically adjustables, okay? There is also a loan called a HE loan, not a SHE loan, but a HE loan. And that means it's one lump sum. It's also one fixed payment. So a HELOC will be variable and will give you a line of credit. So an example would be if the client needed $150,000 to do their build, they would get a $150,000 line of credit, which they only make payments or get charged interest on the use of that line. So the HELOC will be a variable rate and it will adjust according to how much is being used, as well as the monthly payments will adjust to how much is being used. So the HELOC is an open line of credit. Well, I should say it has an end to it. And then the HE loan is the entire 150 in that scenario I just played out. The HE loan is one lump sum loan to the client where they begin making the payments on the full amount. So know the difference between a HELOC and a HE loan. The other combination of loan programs that we offer is what's called a renovation loan. So a renovation loan, which used to be called a home improvement loan, it just got a fancier word because they allow the use of using your equity to help finance the construction of the ADU in the backyard. So a renovation loan is a little more detailed. It requires a registration of a licensed contractor, which our company will vet the contractor to make sure they meet the licensing requirements, which we need at least a 3-year experienced contractor to be registered for the job. We also have what's called a third-party payout, which means after the loan is approved for the construction, we make sure that the work is on schedule in order for the contractor to get payments throughout the construction process. Now, these payments have to be approved by the homeowner to make sure all parties are understanding we are moving along the construction phase to complete the ADU. So the renovation loan is a little more detailed, a little more sophisticated, but the advantages of why a homeowner wants to use a renovation loan is because we will lend up to 90% of the combined value of the property. So we'll use the future value of the addition of the ADU and go up to 90%. Now, why that's important is for some homeowners that don't have a lot of equity currently, but want the ADU, we'll take the appraised future value of the ADU build to give it a higher appraised value that we can finance up to. So this can make the difference between $100,000 and $200,000 of what the borrower could use financing using the renovation loan. So all information can be obtained. I have a website, which is myadululoan.com. You can schedule yourself a consultation. We can walk through all those options. And don't forget, in terms of a specialty product such as the legacy loan, which is geared towards seniors 55 and up, where they can utilize some equity without having a repayment option. Again, I repeat, the legacy loan is designed for 55 and up homeowners. It's a second mortgage. It is basically a reverse mortgage in the second position. It requires a full education process of understanding the options, and it's not for everybody. But what's important is we have many loan products, and they're only getting better and more knowledgeable with the ADU products. So I'm more than happy to walk any client through to understand their options and also to listen what they want to do, because it's always good to listen to everyone's individual game plan and what they plan to do with their ADU. And like my situation, I had many options, and right now I'm living in mine.
Exactly. Goals. And now you're traveling soon.
And now I'm traveling.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I talked about it too in the podcast. There's a lot of misconceptions around reverse mortgages. And I think getting educated is always step one, so that it empowers you to make these decisions moving forward, because there's really just misconceptions around it. It's a great product that may be the best option for you right now. When it comes to the HELOC renovation loans, a great option as well, because as you said, there's a lot of people who may not have all that equity that's needed, right, to maximize space or even build, a garage conversion. So that's where that really comes into play for people who barely have enough equity. Now the bank is saying, okay, well, we're going to lend you based on the future value. Once the ADU is built, then what is that future value? We're going to lend you a little bit more because we know that the property is going to be worth X amount. So now we can kind of push, that equity a little bit more, and that could be the difference, like he said, between you being able to build that studio or not, or build a 2-bedroom versus a 1-bedroom, right? This was one that I sold in Santa Ana. Came with the ADU. We were renting it out, and this was in a trust. Parents passed away. The siblings decided to sell it, right? So we waited until the tenants moved out. And the buyers who purchased it really, really like this neighborhood because it's in Santa Ana, but closer to Orange and like Tustin area. So great neighborhood. And they bought it because it had the detached ADU already for their aging parents. And so for them, the utility thing wasn't an issue. But I remember when I first got the first set of tenants on this property on the management side, it was an issue because they didn't have separate utilities. And so what we did was what I said earlier, averaged out the last 12 months of utility usage, and then we added that to their rental amount. But once they moved out, it was sold to the buyers, and I was able to help both. And yeah, it went from a rental to now it being a primary residence for an aging family member. So that was a good one.
And speaking of a millennial situation, helping parents out, and just want to throw in a qualified borrower that I just worked with. Gentleman is buying an Elsinore. He put 25% down. He's owned it for over 8 months now, and he reached out to me. And with his seasoning requirement on his loan, he wanted to go with a renovation loan. And the seasoning requirement, which means he had to be a homeowner for at least 12 months. And he was going into his 9th month of ownership. But what we did is we got him a pre-approval. And what his strategy is he put 25% down on this property. So he had 25% equity. And we were okay on the equity part. We were just waiting for the homeowner's seasoning requirement. And what he was trying to do is his father was going through a divorce and was finalizing his divorce. And what the son wanted to do is help his dad out and move him back home to live with him. So what we did, and the divorce is about to be finalized, is that he's going to be added onto the son's property now that the divorce is final, and he's going to be a co-signer on the renovation loan to help build the unit for him to live in the backyard. So this is another example of how the flexibility of how, boomers helping their millennial children, in this situation, a millennial child helping their parent move back home and take care of each other on this purchase out in Elsinore. So we're able to help them. I mean, we obviously have to wait another 3 months to get to the 12-month seasoning requirement, but we structured the loan to be ready for them. Now that the father is divorced, moving back home with the son, they're going to co-sign together and do the renovation product.
That's awesome. I had a similar situation. It's funny, it's in Lake Elsinore. I'm like, let me talk to you about the client's info after the call.
Okay, got it.
It's the same people. But yeah, I mean, prime example of how, today's conversation was really to highlight just that. How can we as millennials help boomers, and how can boomers help us, and how can we just be there for one another? I feel like boomers have to start thinking about a retirement game plan or an assisted type of living situation, whether they want to face the reality or not. Like, it's coming. And at the same time, they have so much equity because, they're the only generation that has that amount of equity, right? And so they have this equity. They got to think about retirement, inflation, cost of living, and everything is really getting to them as well, right? So, and then with us millennials, a lot of us are priced out of the market because also inflation, right? So
Right.
how do you even tap into today's market? How can you create any sort of cash flow by just tapping into today's market? You can't. And so and for some of the millennials, it may be an option, but I'd say for the majority, it isn't. And that's where maybe the income that you're producing right now would help leverage and be able to tap into your parents' equity, and kind of bridge that gap. Maybe build one for yourself right now, and later in life you can move to the bigger home and your parents can live in the ADU. Because another thing we didn't really touch on is, the empty nesters. They're not just boomers, they're also empty nesters. So we have a lot of elderly people living in these big single family homes alone by themselves, when they don't need that much space, right? So a lot of people who are downsizing, and then you have millennials who, hopefully want to upgrade and upsize at some point. And so I think there's just a lot that can be done there. So having these conversations in your family gatherings, in your conversations with, family and friends, is a good one to talk about. And reach out to myself when you've already talked to RJ about the financing. I can help you through the build out, right? And I'm sure RJ can also connect you with contractors who need to have that experience. And he's obviously walked through the process himself. So it's easier. It's just a lot easier to be handheld by someone who understands your pain, right?
I'm gonna take that segue right there, Stephanie, because I'm going to use the topic of, I'm sure you've run into this, of finishing the job. So I've run into a couple great homeowners who thought they could do it on their own and basically finance their whole project. Well, and I know, Stephanie, money can go dry and they can go over budget. So be aware that when you're doing your own, let's say your own build out, your own garage conversion, you can run into a lot more expense when you are not licensed as a general contractor. So I strongly advise not going into your do-it-yourself mode, because you could run into a lot of problems, especially trying to get financing to unfix or to fix and unfix your problems. I've run into a couple of them already, and fortunately, we found some solutions to pull out some cash to finish their jobs. But I will tell you, it was not a fun experience to give the bad news to some of these homeowners who did the DIY, and the DIY backfired on them. So you want to be aware.
One of my friends just sent me a link this morning from a mom who literally said she can't retire because she gave up all of her money, all of her savings for the build out, and never heard from the contractor. And they always send me these links, so I just know like what's happening because I'm in the ADU space and I see it day in, day out, where people really just don't vet who they're choosing to work with. And if any contractor is asking you for X amount of money up front, that's already a red flag. There's a couple of red flags I can point out. And if you're having doubts about it, just reach out to me. I could kind of, take a look at what you're being shared with as far as a proposal and feasibility, things like that, to kind of gauge what this contract is really saying. So yeah, definitely reach out to us if that's part of the goal. But I hope that some of the clients that are on here and other realtor friends, and I see Wendy on Instagram, who's also a prime example. She lives in her ADU and her mom lives in the main house. So I think the boomer topic is one that we can all relate to, how millennials can help boomers and vice versa. And so, yeah, if you guys have any other questions, let me know. Also, check out the podcast that RJ and I did, because we went over a lot of this, but a lot more detail, especially on the financing side. And I think it's about another hour of just free knowledge and education. That's where you start.
Agreed. Thank you, Stephanie. Let's see a couple questions here.
JC, I think, had some questions.
Yeah. What are some of the considerations people may not think when building for longevity, such as mobility assistive devices that are considered building an ADU for older adults? So that's more of a construction question. Are you trying to make it like more compliant or wheelchair?
Well, I think one that we did in Long Beach, we did both ADUs. We did a junior ADU and an ADU on the single family home, and both of them were ADA compliant. So do you have to? No. Should you, if it's for an aging family member who may have issues going up the stairs, or it's on a, I don't know, like it's an option that I think people should consider. Other considerations that don't have to do with the structure itself, but considerations around it is power lines. What I mentioned earlier about alley access, that's really good if you have alley access, because there's probably less trenching involved. If it's, not in an HOA, if it's not in a septic, if I have a checklist actually. So yeah, I think he said.
I think we're reference to wheelchair access ADA compliant.
Yeah, if you do ADA compliant, you could do that, and that's we've done that.
Bathrooms, hallways, and walkways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
They can be designed to fit those needs.
Yeah, that's a good point, though, right? Planning for those future considerations. The one that we did ADA compliant, though, wasn't for an aging family member. It was actually for my broker's daughter who's on wheelchair. So he was thinking about her, even though right now he's renting them out to tenants. Right, that property is going to be for his daughter. So thinking ahead, right, he decided to do the build out and making it ADA compliant from the get-go. So that's a good consideration there.
I have another scenario to run by you, Stephanie. So I had this this boomer who's still employed at a large employer and has a large 401k plan. And his strategy was him and his wife were looking to relocate a parent to live with them. And his financing was an interesting one. So he was using a good portion of his 401k withdrawal, because again, he's borrowing against himself, technically speaking. So he's borrowing a loan from himself and paying back himself actually a higher yield. And we structured a loan where half of his money was coming from his 401k and the other half was using a HELOC. But the strategy behind the conversation, because we were doing the comparisons, was to make sure the advantages were to his favor, paying himself back using his 401k, not exhausting it, because of again, 401ks have limits and usage limits on what you can use it for. But under the category what he was using it for, a home improvement, he was able to withdraw a portion of his 401k along with the HELOC. So these are some of the considerations that, again, I like to bring up, because when you're dealing with boomers who have at the ends of their career have accumulated some wealth in their 401ks. We worked at a reasonable strategy that helped him get the most money and the least amount of payments for it to work for him.
Yeah, that's very creative. I mean, we do it on the purchases a lot, but you don't really think about it when you're going to do a build out, right?
Right.
Like, oh,
Yeah,
I
you
tap
usually use a
into my
401k for a loan. Yeah.
Right. Can I tap into my 401k or self-directed IRAs, Roth IRAs, any sort of stocks, investment accounts, right? You could use a portion of that money to help you if you don't have enough equity. And so, yeah, just call RJ when you're ready, because I'm telling you, his mind kind of goes here and there, and it's really, a lot of it comes from experience, but it's also just being so involved in the ADU world. Not every lender or not every realtor is going to know what you're talking about when you go up to them and say, hey, I want to build an ADU, and I saw the realtor and the lender having a conversation around this. They're not all knowledgeable in the space, right? We've kind of decided to niche down into this, and so this is something we do every single day. And I'd highly recommend you guys reach out to us, reach out to RJ for any financing questions too, and just to get to know a little bit more about his story, which I think is very inspiring and motivating.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, guys. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. That was close to an hour. That was awesome. Thank you, guys. We're going to probably do this again soon because, the ADU world keeps updating. I was just at the ADU forum in San Diego and learned about all these new bills that I'm getting ready to talk about in these next couple episodes, and learning different strategies about how to overlap these bills to really help maximize density, which is a whole other topic, but we're definitely going to keep you guys updated with boomer scenarios. If you guys like this, let us know. I think case studies is the best way to learn because it gets your mind going, right? And you just think in different ways that you possibly weren't going to think of had you not been presented this information. So thank you, JC. I'm glad you stuck around. Thank you, Oralia and Janelle and everybody on YouTube and Instagram. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.